Chapter 17 of The Albert Gate Mystery by Louis Tracy. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolin. Chapter 17. The Yacht Bluebell. After breakfast, the party adjourned to their sitting room, and there Brett detailed his immediate plan of action. "The first point to determine is an important one," he said. "Which of you three, Sir Hubert Fitzjames, Talbot, or Fairholme, looks most like a Frenchman?" The trio at once began to scrutinize each other carefully, to Edith's intense amusement. "I am afraid, uncle," she laughed, "we must rule you out at once. You have British Major General, late Indian Army, stamped so plainly on you that here in Marseilles, a port accustomed to the weekly transit of P&O passengers, the smallest child could not fail to identify you. And as for you, Bobby, good gracious, you are painfully Anglo-Saxon. I am afraid, Jack, that we must decide against you. That is to say, I suppose it hurts your vanity to be taken for a Frenchman, but you must not forget that Mademoiselle Beaucaire thought you were good-looking, and I suppose she adopts Parisian standards." Jack was amused by his sister's raillery. "It is gratifying to find," he said, "that there are some handsome Frenchmen. But may I ask, Brett, why you wish one of us to hold down the British flag?" "Because it is necessary that someone should keep a close eye on Gros Jean and the Turks. As a matter of fact, Miss Talbot is doubly right. Sir Hubert Fitzjames might possibly be made up to represent un vieux moustache, but it is essential that you should speak French well." "Then," cried Sir Hubert decisively, "I am out of court, because my French is weak and I always want to go off into Hindustani whenever I open my mouth. Why, even this morning when I rang for my hot water, I said to the waiter, 'Gurum pani lao.' I am sure he thought I was swearing at him." "Very well," concurred the barrister. "It comes back to you, Talbot, and I regret to inform you that for the next few hours you must be content with the inferior cooking and accommodation of the Jolie Femme Hotel. If you will come out with me now, I will get you rigged up in a cheap French suit. That and a supply of bad cigarettes will provide a sufficient disguise for your purpose. You must pack a few belongings in a green tin box and betake yourself to the Jolie Femme. Do not make any inquiries about Gros Jean, simply watch him." "But what about the Turks?" said Talbot. "Perhaps two of these scoundrels may be the identical pair who accompanied Dubois to Albert Gate. It is possible that they may recognize me at once." "No," said Brett decisively. "This is a different gang. The two men who committed the murders never came to Paris. Dubois would not hear of it, I am certain. If you act with discretion, I am sure they will never suspect you." "Can't you find me a job?" demanded Fairholme. "Yes, a most pleasant one. It will be your duty to accompany Miss Talbot and Sir Hubert and show them the sights of Marseilles. I will meet you here at luncheon, but we probably cannot see Mr. Talbot again until late tonight, when he will have an opportunity to come here quietly and detail the results of his observations. Of course," he added, addressing the young man directly, "if anything important happens during the day, you know where to find me, either personally or by messenger." It was natural that Edith's first steps with her lover and uncle would tend towards the scene of her overnight adventure. But Miss Talbot was a clear-headed girl, and took no risks. She knew well that in a chance encounter the sharp eyes of Marie and Eugenie might pick her out unless she was to some extent shrouded from observation. So she donned a large Paris hat and a smart costume, which, with the addition of a thick veil, rendered her very unlike the girl who 12 hours earlier was pursuing a recalcitrant lover. Secure in the changed appearance effected by these garments, and especially in the escort of two so English-looking persons as Lord Fairholme and Sir Hubert Fitzjames, she walked with them down the Canebière and on the quay. She showed them the street up which she pursued Mademoiselle Beaucaire, and the point on the wharf whence the fishing smack took her departure into the unknown. Then they strolled back around the harbour, still pursuing the track of Edith's midnight wanderings, when Fairholme suddenly whistled with amazement. "By Jove, look here!" he cried. "That's a piece of luck!" He pointed to the upper part of the basin, in which a number of smart yachts were anchored side by side. Marseille is a natural point of departure for Mediterranean tours, and many yacht owners send their vessels here to be coaled and stored for projected trips. "What is it?" queried Edith, when she could see nothing in the locality indicated save the vessels and the small expanse of water dancing in the rays of a bright sun. "The very best thing that could have happened. This is Daubigny's yacht, the Bluebell." "Yes, so I see. It would be charming if we had time to go for a run along the Riviera, but I am afraid, whilst Mr. Brett controls our energies, amusement of that sort will be out of our reach." "Not a bit of it. You don't see my point, Edith. Daubigny is a first-rate chap, and a thorough sportsman. Suppose it becomes necessary for us to follow up Dubois and his fishing smack, and we let Daubigny into the know. The Bluebell would pursue the Belle Sœur to China. He would ask no better fun. I tell you that Brett will be delighted when he hears of it." "Yes, dear, but we do not even know that Mr. Daubigny is in Marseille." "Let us go and see. It doesn't matter a pin anyhow, because a telegram from me to him would place the yacht at our disposal, and he would join us by express at the first possible stopping place. You do not know what a good chap Daubigny is." "No," said Edith shortly. "He is evidently a most useful acquaintance." It is a most curious fact that young ladies in the engaged stage regard their fiancés' male friends with extreme suspicion. The more enthusiastic the man, the more suspicious the woman. Fairholme, sublimely unconscious of this feminine weakness, continued to dilate upon the superlative excellencies of Daubigny until they reached the yacht itself. A smartly attired sailor was pretending to find some work in carefully uncoiling a rope which did not satisfy his critical eye. Before Fairholme could hail the man, a rotund form, encased in many yards of blue serge, surmounted by a jolly-looking face on top of which was perched an absurdly small yachting cap, emerged from the companion. "Why, there he is!" shouted the Earl. "Hullo, Daubigny! Yoicks, tally-o!" The person addressed in this startling manner stopped as though he had been shot. He gazed at the sky and then gravely surveyed the gilded statue that surmounts the picturesque church of Notre Dame de la Garde. "Here I am, you idiot!" continued Fairholme. "I am not in a balloon. I am on the quay. Come here quick! I want to introduce you to Edith and Sir Hubert." Luckily, Miss Talbot's dark doubts had vanished after one keen glance at Daubigny. He was evidently a safe friend for her future husband. Such a fat and hail-fellow-will-meet individual could not possibly harbour guile. So she passed over without reference the extent of Daubigny's acquaintance concerning herself, implied by the use of her Christian name. Indeed, was there not a compliment in Fairholme's unconscious outspokenness? If he only discussed her charms with Daubigny, then Daubigny was a man to be cultivated. The meeting on the quay was hearty in the extreme, and the Honourable James Daubigny further ingratiated himself by saying, "Even if Lord Fairholme had not told me who you were, Miss Talbot, I should have known you at once." "That would be very clever of you," purred Edith. "Oh no, there is nothing remarkable in the fact, I assure you. He always sat in his chambers so that he could look at your photograph, and as, in addition to that speaking likeness, I know the colour of your hair, your eyes, your teeth even, I could not be mistaken." Miss Talbot thought Mr. Daubigny rather curious, but still he was very nice, and unquestionably the services of the Bluebell might be more than useful. So she was graciousness personified in her manner, and promptly determined to invite him to luncheon, thinking that the chance direction of their conversation with Mr. Brett might lead towards the use of the yacht being hinted at. She counted without Fairholme. The latter slapped his heavy friend on the back. "Look here, old chap, are you fixed up for a cruise? Plenty of coal, champagne, and all that sort of thing?" "Loaded to the gunwales." "That's all right, because we may want the Bluebell for a month or so." "There she is," said Daubigny, "fit to go anywhere and do anything." Miss Talbot had never heard such extraordinary conduct in her life. She wondered how two women would have conducted the negotiations. The question was too abstruse, so she gave it up and contented herself instead with accepting Daubigny's hearty request that they should inspect the yacht. The Bluebell was an extremely smart little ship of 250 tons register and an ordinary speed of 12 knots. Incidentally, Miss Talbot discovered that the owner made the vessel his home. He was never happy away from her, and the Bluebell was known to every yachtsman from the Hebrides to the Golden Horn. To eke out her coal supply she was fitted with sails, and Daubigny assured his fair visitor that the Bluebell could ride out a gale as comfortably and safely as any craft afloat. Altogether, Miss Talbot congratulated herself on Fairholme's discovery, and she could not help hoping that their strange errand to Marseille might eventuate in a Mediterranean chase. When the tour of inspection had ended, Daubigny suggested an excursion. "I understand you have never been to Marseille before, Miss Talbot. In that case, what do you say if we run over and see the Chateau d'If, the place that Dumas made famous, you know?" "Is it far?" said Edith. "Oh, not very, about a mile across the harbour. Monte Cristo swam the distance, you know, after his escape." "Shall we go in the yacht?" Daubigny bubbled with laughter. "Well, not exactly, Miss Talbot. You cannot swing a ship of this size about so easily as all that, you know. I have another craft alongside that will suit our purpose." He whistled to a tiny steam launch which Edith had not noticed before, and without further ado the party seated themselves. They sped rapidly down the harbour and out through the narrow entrance between the lighthouses. No sooner did Edith behold the splendid panorama of rocky coast that encloses the great outer bay, with its blue waters studded with delightful little islands, through which fishing boats and small steam tugs threaded their way towards different points on the coast, than she clasped her hand with schoolgirl delight. "I had no idea," she said, "that Marseille was half so beautiful. Why, it is a wonderful place. I have always read about it being hot and dirty. It certainly is untidy, but to wash its citizens would take away all the romance. As for the climate being hot, just imagine a day like this in the middle of November. Can you possibly think what the sensation would be if you were plunged into a London fog at this moment, Mr. Daubigny?" "I have hardly ever seen one," he replied. I take mighty good care to be far removed from my beloved country during the fog season." She sighed. What is it to be a man and to be able to roam about the world unfettered? "It all depends upon the meaning of the word unfettered," said Daubigny. "Have you got any sisters, Miss Talbot?" They all laughed at his inconsequent question. It was impossible to resist Daubigny's buoyant good nature, and Edith felt certain that in half an hour she would be calling him Jimmy. They sped across the waves towards the Chateau d'If and drew up alongside its small landing stage. The island supplies an all-the-year-round resort for the townspeople. Every fine day a steamer runs at intervals to and fro between it and the inner harbour. The good folk of the south of France, where the Marseillais are visitors to the city, find a constant delight in taking the short marine excursion and wandering for half an hour about the rocky pathways and steep turrets of the famous prison, whilst they listen with silent awe to the words of the guide when he tells them how the abbé died and shows them the hole between the two walls excavated by Monte Cristo. So the English visitors found themselves in the midst of a number of laughing, light-hearted French sightseers. They wandered round with the crowd until Edith looked at her watch. "It is past 12 o'clock," she said. "Should we not going back to the hotel to lunch? You will come with us, of course, Mr. Daubigny?" "I am famished with expectation," answered the irrepressible Jimmy. "But before we go away, you certainly ought to climb to the leads and get the panoramic view of the harbour which the tower affords on a clear day. It is a sight to be remembered, I promise you." So they made the ascent, Daubigny leading in his capacity of guide, though he was quite breathless when they reached the top of the steps. Edith followed him, and to her alarm perceived that he was purple in the face. He tried to smile, and indicated by a gesture that he would recover in a minute. Meanwhile he was speechless. Fairholme was next up. He had hardly set a foot on the roof before he exclaimed, "Well, I'm damned!" Edith turned round quickly. "What on earth is the matter?" she cried. "Why are you using such horrid language? Mr. Daubigny only hurried a little too fast, that is all." Fairholme dropped his voice to a whisper. "Look," he said, indicating with his eyes a distant corner. Edith followed his glance and instantly comprehended the cause of his startled exclamation. For in that quiet spot, far removed from watchful police or inquisitive hotel servants, stood four men whom she could not fail to recognize as Gros Jean, Hussein al-Mulk, and the two other Turks, although, of course, until this moment she had never previously set eyes on them. She instantly understood that they must continue to talk and act in the guise of ordinary tourists. In this respect the presence of Daubigny was invaluable, for he naturally could not guess the community of interests between his aristocratic friends and the motley group in the corner. As soon as he regained his breath, Edith and he commenced a lively conversation. Sir Hubert joined them, and in the course of their casual stroll around the tower they passed close to the Frenchman and his companions, attracting a casual glance from the former, who instantly set them down as English people bound for the East, and whiling away a few hours in Marseille prior to the departure of their steamer. But another surprise awaited them. A small staircase led to the top of the turret, which, as already described, formed part of the angle that sheltered the group of men. When Edith and the others strolled past the door, they glanced inside and caught sight of a shabby-looking Frenchman who had paused halfway up the stairs and was leaning eagerly forward through an embrasured loophole, obviously intent on hearing every word uttered by the quartet beneath. Fortunately Edith, who was nearest to the door, was completely shrouded from Gros Jean's observation, else that astute gentleman might have noticed her involuntary start of surprise, for the shabby-looking Frenchman was her brother. The instant Talbot heard footsteps, he naturally turned to see who it was that approached, and he also was amazed to find Edith's wondering eyes fixed upon him at a distance of only a few feet. She nodded her head and placed a warning finger on her lips. As it happened, Daubigny caught her in the act, and for the next few moments that gentleman's emotions were intense, not to say painful. "Who would have thought it?" he muttered to himself. "A girl like her making secret signs to a dirty scoundrel of that sort. The beggar was good-looking, of course, but what? Oh, well, I give it up. Poor old Fairholme. What funny creatures women are, to be sure." How much farther this soliloquy might have proceeded we know not, for Edith sharply interrupted his thoughts. "You seem to be preoccupied, Mr. Daubigny. What has happened?" she inquired. I really don't know." His distress was so unmistakable that her quick woman's wit divined the true cause. They had now sauntered some distance away from the part of the tower that might be marked as dangerous, so she grasped Jimmy's ponderous arm and whispered with a delightful smile, "You saw me make signs to that Frenchman, didn't you?" "Well, Oh yes, I understand. Of course you were surprised, but don't jump now or say anything. He is my brother." She need not have warned Daubigny as to any remarks he might feel inclined to make, for her announcement again rendered him speechless. "It is a mystery," she whispered, "a deep secret. We will tell you all about it at lunch." End of chapter 17.